Good day, sir. My name is Janalin P. Agnes, Base Cream 3, Section C. This is my 45 minutes video. My topic is about Chapter 8, Gunshot Residue. Basically, gunshot residue comes from the powder component of bullet elements from cartridge, cases, and barrel, where the bullet passes when these components are born. Certain products of combustion are formed, which includes partially born and unborn particles. These particles are deposited on the target as definite pattern depending upon the distance between muzzle of the gun and the target at the time of discharge. Upon discharge of firearm, gunpowder residues, nitrates may be deposited on a personal at close proximity. So the interpretation as to discharge the firearm shall be made with caution. Torsion in 1986. Hand or body part close to the fired weapon may have gunpowder residue consistent with having discharged the weapon. However, absence of gunpowder residues on the person's hands or body parts does not mean that he or she did not discharge of a firearm. My example is about gunpowder. What is the definition of gunpowder? Gunpowder, also commonly known as black powder, to distinguish it from modern smokeless powder, is the earliest known chemical explosive. It consists of a mixture of sulfur, carbon, and potassium nitrate. The sulfur and carbon act as foil, while the saltpeter is an oxidizer. And gunpowder residue may be found on the skin or clothing of the person who discharged the gun. On the gun, on the entrance bullet hole of garment or wound of the victim, or on other target materials at the scene. What is the three component of gunshot residue? The first is primary or lead residue. And number two is gunpowder residue. And the last is element component from cartridge cases residue. And compositions of primer. Primer elements may be easier to detect in residue because they do not get as hot as that of powder. And number one is major primer element composition, lead, barium or Ba, or antimony or Sb. And number two is trace element aluminum, all sulfur S, tin or Sn, calcium for Ca, and potassium for Kim, chlorine Ci, or the last is silicon for Si. And number three is inorganic compound. Mercury fulminates present in most ammunitions manufactured in Eastern Europe and used in Middle East. And gunshot. What is gun hot reside? Gun hot reside, also known as cartridge, cartridge discharge or reside, and the gunfire residue or firearm discharge residue is residue deposit on the hand on clothes of someone who discharge a firearm. And next is, in addition, this residue gradually adhere to the discharge bullets. Those primary residue can be found in targets or wounds at considerable distance from the muzzle up to 200 meters. 200 meters. 200 meters. And the composition of gunpowder is, number 1 is contains up to 23 organic compounds of FBI study. And number 2 is nitrocellulose in virtually always present along with nitrate or nitrogen containing or compound such as dipenylamine or DPA stabilizer in the powder. Types of gunpowder. Number 1 is single base, when the basic ingredient is nitrocellulose. And number 2 is double base. What double base is? Nitrocellulose plus 1 to 40% nitroglycerin. And number 3, and the last one is triple base. What is that? Triple base is nitrocellulose plus nitroglycerin plus nitroguanidine. And this can be different using a mass spectrophotometer. Composition of cartridge case, bullet, coating, and metal jacket. And number 1 is cartridge and primary case brass in 7-3 copper zinc. And number 2 is bullet cores, lead, antimony, and few iron alloy. And number 3 is bullet jackets, brass, 9-1 copper zinc. Some are iron or aluminum alloy. Some contain nickel. And gunshot residue examination. Purpose of gunshot residue examination is gunshot residue examination are performed to help the investigators in determining whether a person has discharged a firearm or not, whether a firearm was discharged or not, and the possible gunshot range or the distance of the shooter to the victim, both hands of the suspect as well as those of the victim. The firearm and clothing of the victim must be examined to determine the presence of gunpowder nitrates. And what are the types powder used? This is the type of powder used in the ammunitions of small firearms. These are 2 types of powder used in the ammunition of small firearm. These are the black powder. What is the black powder? Black powder, this consists of a mixture of charcoal, sulfur, and potassium nitrate. This mixture is used as an igniter in smokeless gun propellant. It consists of a mixture of 15% charcoal and 10% sulfur, and the last is 75% potassium nitrates. Aluminum is added to enhance The burning property. Burning property. When this powder is burned, combustion reaction takes place. And 2K N or 03 plus 2O2 plus S plus C, CO2 plus SO2 plus K202 plus 2NO2. And that number 2 is the smokeless powder. This this mixture this mixture consists of cellulose or glycerol nitrate combined with some stabilizer, nitrobenzene or graphite nitrates. They chromate and oxalates when this powder includes the chemical reaction take place. And what is the detection of gunshot residue? The definition of this is with a new portable sensor, detective can quickly swab a suspect hands with an electrode and determine whether the person recently fired a gun. Currently, investigators swab suspects hands to collect samples and then briefing those samples to a laboratory to detect gunshot residue. And method of examination. When perform a physical assessment, you use 4 techniques: inspections, palpation, percussion, and osculation. Use them in sequence unless you performing on abdominal assessment. Palpation and percussion can alter vowel sounds. So you inspect, auscultate, percus, then palpitate an abdomen. And the next is primer. Excuse. The next is primer. To explode a low explosive, frame is required in gun. The frame is applied by means of a primer. Primer produce flame on percussion. A typical primer consists of a case containing an initiating explosive such as mercury, fulminate, and oxidizing agents such as potassium chlorate or barium nitrate, and a fuel such as antimony sulfide. This component is the this component this component this component is the basic examination of gunshot residue, particularly primary residue for distance determination. Detection of gunshot residue. The following are common methods used by most crime laboratories to detect gunshot residue. Number 1 is paraffin test. And number 2 is lead residue. Detection limit up to 30 feet and always present on the opposite sides of the penetrate target, reported from intermediate glass target. Present Maslier and Armstrong in 1978. And number 3 is the gunpowder residue. Examination, detection limit, highly variable, up to 20 centimeter and 21 inches is commonly. The last is other examination. The last two methods are classical color development or modern method, such as neutron activation analysis or NAA. Atomic absorption spectrometry or AAS, scanning electron microscopy with energy. Dispersive analysis, or SEM or EDA. An inductively coupled plasma with mass spectrometry or ICP or MS are used. History of paraffin test determinate or test dermal nitrate or dipenlamine test. Dipenlamine test. Paraffin test was originate from Cuba when Dr. Gonzalo Erotiers fires use of paraffin for collecting gunpowder residues from the discharged firearm in 1933. Teodoro Gonzalez of Criminal Investigation Laboratory Mexico City introduced the test in the United States. In this test, the hands were coated with a layer of melted paraffin. After cooling, the cast were removed and treated with dipenlamine or 5% DPA percent sulfuric. And method of examination: paraffin test. Paraffin test to determine whether a person is discharge a firearm. The paraffin dihenlamine test is use the basic of this test in the presence of nitrates in the gunpowder residue when a warm melted paraffin wax is applied on the hands of allied shooter. It will causes the pores of the skin to open and exude the particles of gunpowder residue. These particles of gunpowder residue are being extracted by the paraffin cast with the use of melted paraffin wax and will appear the blue specks when dipenlamine reagent DPA for this purity is added on the cast. It must be noted that the specks are generally located on the area of the thumbs of four fingers. And take note, the blue color that appears indicate the reaction of nitrates when dipenlamine reagent. Those nitrates from other sources like fertilizer will give the same reaction. Other substances similar to the nitrates known as oxidizer will also react with the reagent in the same way. However, it must also be noted that the blue specks have the characteristic of tolling rather. With what is the principle behind the paraffin test? While the born and partially born particles gunpowder residue is deposited on the target and in the barrel of the gun, some of these born and partially born particles may escape around the breech of the gun, and some may be embedded on the exposed surface of the hand of the person discharged the firearm. Thus, the presence of this residue can be detected by way of paraffin examination. As a rule, in the paraffin examination, the forensic chemist or chemical officer shall personally conduct the paraffin casting on the allied shooter. However, a component of laboratory technician under the supervision of the examiner on case may also perform the paraffin casting, but it is the forensic chemist or chemical officer who shall examine the paraffin cast, taking from both hands of the allied shooter to determine the presence of gunpowder nitrate. Paraffin casting of the allied shooter shall only be done within the 72 hours from the time of the allied shooting incident. No person shall be subjected to paraffin casting after the lapse of the special period. Involvement cadaver who allegedly discharged a firearm shall no longer be subjective of paraffin. Examination because of the impossibility of extracting the gunpowder nitrates from the former hand, taking of paraffin cast material and apparatus. Paraffin wax is MP 38.40 degrees Celsius. Absorbent cotton, bond paper, burner, baker, casserole, or tong. The procedure is heat the paraffin wax in the container until it melts. Allow cooling for a few minutes so that it will not burn the skin. And letter B, let the subject wash his hands with a water without using any soap or detergent. Wipe the hands of the subject with clean absorbent cotton. And letter C is let the subject place his hands on a clean sheet of bond paper with the palms facing downward and the finger close together using a spoon or tongue with cotton. Pour the melt paraffin wax on the hands of the subject from the thumbs and index finger and the dorsal portion to the little finger side of the hands. And letter D is cover your hands and fingers through with the paraffin wax and place a thin of layer of absorbent cotton to reinforce the wax. And letter E is pour another layer of the wax until the absorbent cotton has totally absorbed the wax. And letter F is allow the wax to cool the solidify before peeling them off. And letter G is which call direct the subject to move his fingers, first of slowly moving his hands out from the cast. Letter H is placed on the bond paper and case number name of the subject, time and date, technician who took the cast, witnesses and label the right and left hand. And letter I is place another bond paper on the top of the paraffin cast of the staple together. And letter G is place the paraffin cast inside and develop or box for proper preservation. Notes. It must be noted that upon casting, the melted paraffin wax penetrates the minute crevices of the skin. Thus, the burn of partially burned gunpowder nitrates which are embedded on the hands of the shooter and extra upon application of the dipenlamine or reagent on the paraffin cast. The appearance of tealing deep blue specks indicates the presence of gunpowder nitrates. Paraffin wax or paraffin wax. Paraffin wax is a white translucent, tasteless, odorless solid consisting of the mixture of solid hydrocarbons of high molecular weight in insoluble in water and acids of soluble in benzene, lignin, or warm alcohol, chloroform of turpentine or carbon disulfide and olive oil combustible auto ignitions of temperature of 473 F to 45 degree Celsius. The melted paraffin wax penetrates the minute crevice of the skin upon application, thus adhering If there are particles present when the casts are filled, the born and partially born particles are extracted. A person of firing a gun will likely have the particles located above the thumbs and four fingers, since these are the surface exposed to the gun. What shall be noted in the interpretation of results? Time and reactions. Number and characteristic of blue and minute speak, and the location of character of the blue speaks. And the last is distribution and location. Location. Different names of the test. What is the different name of a test? Number 1 is lung test. And number 2 is the penlamine test. Number 3 is the dermal nitrate test. And the last one is Gonzalez test. Pilido ng Gonzalez. Name after the one who improved the test. And question, in there any means of removing these nitrates from the hands? How long will they stay in the pores? Answer is none. Ordinary washing will not remove the nitrates from the pores of the skin. Usually, gunpowder nitrates that are embedded on the skin stay for 72 hours. That is the why paraffin casting shall be conducted within the special period. And substances giving false positive result. Number 1 is fertilizers. Number 2 is explosives. And number 3 is tobacco. Number 4 is urine. Urine. Number 5 is certain cosmetics. And number 6 is food samples. And the last one is cigarette. Cigarette is dangerous to your health. Question, will these substances not give positive results for paraffin test? And the answer is if the hands of the subject's person are contaminated with the nitrates other than from gunpowder, one will expect to find smudges or just a smear or blue color or conglomeration of blue specks, but nitrates from gunpowder appear as blue speck with tailing because these particles were embedded into the land with tailing because these particles were embedded into the hands with force. Question is what is paraffin test result conclusive evidence and why? The answer is no. It is just a corroborative evidence which intends to support the testimony of eyewitness. There are instances wherein a person who actually discharged a firearms would still give negative result to the paraffin test because of several factors. Question is what are these factors? The answer is types of caliber of ammunition. Number 2 is use of glove. Number 3 is length of the barrel. And number 4 is edge of the gun. Efficiency of mechanism. Number 5 is direction of firing. Number 6 is wind direction and velocity. Number 7 is humidity, percentage moisture in air. And number 8, the last one, is when 72 hours had already lapsed of 3 days. And types of calibers of ammunition. A hand discharging a revolver is more likely to give a positive result for gunpowder nitrates compared to that of a hand discharge in pistol in an automatic pistol. Chamber is an integral part of the barrel whereas in the revolver. The, the chamber is located in the cylinder and separated from the barrel with air, air place, air place. Thus, leakage of powder in a revolver is more likely to cure. False positive result. Number one is contamination of transfer of gunshot residue of GSR to the body of mishandling or when the body is heavily contaminated by GSR from previous shootings. Number two is washing of hands where samples are collected. And number three is types of ammunition such as rifle, shotgun. Length of barrel. A weapon of 2-inch barrel will deposit residue over a larger area than a weapon of 5-inch barrel, even if they are discharged from the same distance with the same type of ammunition. In a longer barrel, the hand is farther away from the muzzle end of the gun. It takes a bullet to travel in more times, thus using up burning up more if not all of the nitrates in a short barrel. The bullet travels through the barrel in less time, leaving behind a greater amount of unburned particles. Number and age of the gunshot efficiency of mechanism. Complete combustion or the conversion of the nitrates into the end products COCONO or OH. It's more likely to cure in a new weapon compared to an old one. Besides, leakage of gunpowder is more likely to happen in the old weapon, where the breech mechanism is no longer tightly fitted direction of firing. More powder residues will be obtained when the gun is discharged pointing upward than downward. Gunpowder residues have weight and will naturally fall down because of gravity. Wind direction of velocity. It is the higher velocity, strong wind. The powder residues will be blown in the direction of the wind. Wind. One is more likely to be positive 4. Positive 4 of gunpowder. Gunpowder nitrates. Gunpowder nitrates. Gunpowder nitrates if there is no wind or wind direction is towards the shooter. Humidity percentage. Moisture in air. Humidity lessens the agent combustion yielding more gunpowder nitrates. False positive reactions. Smear of blue color or a colorations of the blue specks on both dorsal and palm aspect of the hand. Failure to find the traces of nitrates on the hand of the person does not prove he did not fire gun, but it is submitted that the paraffin test has some value due to the psychological effect on the person whose hands were found positive. Also, the finding of actual trace of gunpowder nitrates on the hand of the person does not causally determine or establish that he has discharged a gun. It is possible that the GPR particles may have been blown in the hand directly from the barrel of the gun being discharged by another person. And gunpowder residue test on firearms. That distaminin reagent is also applied to cotton swabbing of the barrel and chamber of the gun to determine if the firearm was discharged. A deep blue color resulting from the reaction of nitrates with the reagent indicates presence of gunpowder residue. And establish the forensic rules. Number one is the forensic chemist is the case shall be conduct the gunpowder residue examination GPR without delay. And number two is after the examination is done, the firearm shall be returned on the representative of the requesting unit if the request is slowly for the gunpowder residue. GPR examination of submitted to the feed if ballistic examination is required. And the gunshot range of G as R. Determination, also known as gunshot distance determination. When the firearm is discharged, the gunpowder residue may also deposit on the clothing of the victim. The size and the size the size and the density of the pattern, the gunpowder residue found on the clothing are the main factor considered in determining the approximate distance of the shooter to the victim. As the distance to the victim increase, the size of pattern expand while density decrease, the vice versa. Distance determination, meaning, is the method of determining the distance between the firearm and the target. This is usually based on the distance of the powder patterns or the spread of the shot patterns. Importance of distance determination in connecting the self-defense. Please. Number 2 is the distinctions between murder and suicide. Is it possible to state with certainty the distance of the gun from the target by means of the pattern of the residue left the target, not only the type of gun but also the condition of the type of ammunition that will affect this pattern. And in certaining the gunshot range of GESR, the examiner shall not observe the following. And number 1 is entrance of the exit holes. Number 2 is power residue pattern, burning, sing-seeing, smugging, tattooing, a black coarsely prepared pattern. Edge of the gun efficiency is mechanism. Completely combustion on the conversion of the nitrates into its ends products is more likely to occur in a new weapon compared to the old one. Besides, leakage of the gunpowder is the more likely to happen in old weapon, where the breech mechanism is no longer tightly fitted. C is the direction of firing. More powder residue will be obtained when the gun is fired upward, downward. Gunpowder residue have weight and will naturally fall down because of gravity. D is wind direction and velocity. In high velocity strong wind, the powder residues will be blown in the direction of the wind. One is more likely to be positive for gunpowder nitrates if there is no wind or the direction is away from the body. Letter E is humidity percentage. Moisture in air humidity lessens to extend the combustion, yielding more gunpowder nitrates. And powder tattooing produces the coarsely prepared pattern. Individual speaks of tattooing around the hole, the visible by naked eye, and the area of blackening around the perforation will be found diminish in size as the muzzle of the gun is held further away from the target. Take note that the size of the area is powder tattooing will also depend on the following caliber, powder charge, and the last is distance of firing. Individual specks of tattooing around the hole are visible to the naked eye. The area of blackening around the perforation will be found to diminish in the size as the muzzle of the gun is held further in the distance of 8 inches. Blackening around the hole will completely. Oh my god. Tang na. Completely. And completely disappear. A few individual speaks of tattooing will be visible to the naked eye, and letter C is once effective at the distance of more than 36 inches. powder tattooing is seldom present. Nitrates found will not be sufficient for GSR. What is GSR? Bullet, bullet, bullet comparison. A type of examination uses microscope, which is commonly used in comparison of an empty shell containing characteristic marks from grooves of the gun, barrel, and firing pin of specific firearms use. Other methods of examination to determine whether the victim was holding a firearms. One method used is spraying the hands of victim with Florine hair spray determine the presence of iron traces. Lee in 1986. 86. Hydroxyguanolene test with fluorescence photography can also be used. Steven and Meisler in 1974. A suicide a suicide of victims hand are the strain with orange-brown color upon contact to the gun barrel following death, presumably from perspirations without prolonged post-modern interval of impact. And Latin fingerprints can be detected in cartridge. An expanded shell casing is the Latin because the substance from perspirations mixed with the oils from the sebaceous glands are transferred via a substance on the skin bridge to an object. Increase of temperatures and low humidity decreases persistence of fingerprints. Brass platen fingerprint that nickel plate materials given in 1976. Firearms examination. There is the method of the determine the probably time that firearm has been discharged. And letter E is Lucas test. This is our Lucas. A characteristic smell that decrease in intensity with lapse of time is present immediately after firing, but even after several weeks, some slight smell remains. Now, letter B is odor. Hydrogen sulfide is the meaning of odor. This is another product resulting from combustion of gunpowder, which is present in the gaseous state. This compound can be detected by means of lead acetate paper test. If the breech of gun is kept closed, this is persist between 2 or 3 hours. And sulfide, the greater part of this disappear is about 4 to 5 hours, but frequently a trace remains for a longer time. The longest period being is 10 hours. Excuse. Letter C is odor of the barrel. Rusting. As a rule, note rust can be detected inside the barrel of a firearms if such firearm has not been discharged, but if the firearms has been discharged, iron salts are formed and can be detected inside the barrel. These iron salts are soon oxidized, resulting in the formation of rust. The formation of rust is affected by the humidity of the air, so that in the interpretation of the result, this factor always be considered. And letter D is the presence of nitrates by the cotton of swabbing method. Nitrates diminish after the lapse of the nitrates can be detected by the swabbing a portion of residue in the barrel and mixing the residue with the depenylamine solution or DPA. And letter E is the The letter E is thermal nitrate test. A test is designed to determine the presence of gunpowder nitrates on the hand of the allied shooter. Distance Distance from the H gun has been discharged. Significant. A is connecting with self-defense. B is the detection of between murder and suicide if can be stated certainly in the distance of the gunpowder of target by the way of patterns residue left in the victim. And the last one is scoring of the seeing. This is the last topic. If a firearm was discharged very close to the target, as in the case of allied, suicide is sometimes in murder, burns of scorches may result. The resulting reaction is caused by the frame of image in the muzzle of traverse. Only a short distance from it. This distance will be vary with the length of the barrel, the size of the powder discharge, and the degree of which the bullet filled the barrel. This is the presence from the muzzle. And this is the last topic. And thank you, sir, for thank you and good day.